pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, golazo,
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Soccer Today. Duane is on assignment today. Joining me as co-host in the co-host chair today, Jonathan Tannenwald of Philly.com and the Philadelphia Inquirer, responsible for soccer. Jonathan, how are you doing today?
Good morning. How are you? I'm fine.
I'm doing great, and I have to say, I've been quite pumped since Sunday. One of the few times we had a MLS soccer game in French here in Montreal, in Quebec, in Canada, on TVA Sport, Seattle, LA. But on the English version, for once, something newsworthy happened at halftime. Alexi Lawless went on an epic rant. Yes, it's a little bit made for show, but still, that rant is getting a lot of traction. And Jonathan, if you give me permission, let's listen to Alexi Lawless right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, Mark, it's dark days indeed, but this is a time for leaders to step up. And so to the supposed leaders, I will say this. All right, Tim Howard. Tim, the Belgium game ended 3 years ago. We need you to save the ball now. Jeff Cameron, clean it up or let's get someone who will. Clint Dempsey, yeah, you're a national team legend. Now we need you to be a national team leader. Michael Bradley, the U.S. does not need you to be zen. The U.S. needs you to play better. Josie Altidore, is this really as good as it gets? Because it's still not good enough. Bruce Arena. Bruce, Jurgen Klinsmann lost at home to Mexico. You lost at home to Costa Rica. This is now all on you, not Jurgen. Oh, and by the way, to all the guys that I didn't mention it because you don't even warrant to mention, that includes you too, Wonder Boy. So, what are you guys going to do? Are you going to continue to be a bunch of soft, underperforming, tattooed millionaires? You are a soccer generation that has been given everything. You are a soccer generation who is on the verge of squandering everything. So, now it's time to pay it back. Make us believe again. If you don't owe it to yourselves, you owe it to us. And get off my lawn.
Is he right, Jonathan?
Well, he's certainly right that lots of people ought to get off his lawn.
7,000 retweet as of last night.
Look, it was absolute. I think it was made for show. I think Alexi believes it. But the first thing I thought was, boy, Fox is awfully scared about the U.S. not being in the first World Cup they're ever broadcasting.
Is it a possibility?
Sure, it's a possibility. And look, Alexi's a good friend of mine. I don't agree with everything he says. But honestly, I ignored it. And here's why I ignored it. Ultimately, this is what it comes down to. It comes down to Michael Bradley at the end of the day because he left Europe to come to MLS and take a lot of money. And there are segments of the American soccer community that have hated him for his entire life because they thought he was played because he was Bob's kid. And if he is that bad, then why didn't Jurgen Klinsmann kick him out of the team? Perhaps because there wasn't and isn't yet a better player at the position. So do you kick him out and just say, okay, we're going to play a bunch? Like, there's people who want Josh Sargent, who's 17 years old, on this team, even though he doesn't have a professional contract. You want me to really give you a hot take? That's the sort of thing Canada does. That's not the sort of thing the United States does.
We used to do those type of things. We don't do them anymore.
You're going to take a 17-year-old with no professional contract to the World Cup and assume that he's that good right now? I wouldn't. Come on.
No, well, of course. I have to agree with you.
And look, did the U.S. fall flat against Costa Rica? Yes. Would the crowd have been recognized for the pro-American crowd if they had been given any reason to do anything other than sit there and watch Costa Rica score 2 goals? Yes, I was there. A lot of the people who were complaining were not. And I don't usually like to say I did this and you didn't, but in that case, unfortunately, it is a statement of fact that I was there and others were not.
The part of the rant where I think he might be onto something, and yes, he used big words to explain it, saying it's a soccer generation that was given everything.
Like Boy Wonder?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a little strong. But He's not wrong, though. It's a soccer generation that, if you look at the infrastructures, if you're looking at the playing time, the development, the investment in the program itself, it's a generation that has been given maybe not everything, but a lot more than generation before, and the generation that Alexi Lawless was part of. So he might be
as a coach and as a general manager, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
So is it a little bit of, get off my lawn because other people's lawns are nicer? Maybe. Honestly, I just about ignored it in the moment, and it would be just as well to ignore it now. I really don't think it's that big a deal. And all it's doing is sort of helping make something out of something that isn't much.
No, for sure. But if you're continuing in the same vein and World Cup, and 2026 is a year that is going to be very interesting, but the next few
Well,
years...
okay, let me say one more thing, by the way.
Okay, go ahead.
If Jason DeVos had done it while working for TSN, and I like Jason a lot, but he would go off on plenty of rants. If Jason DeVos had done it, what would the reaction have been?
Probably the same, just on a very, very different scale, smaller one, but it would probably be the same, where it's getting a lot of attention, it gets people talking, it gets people to retweet and to share this sentiment, but it doesn't necessarily illustrate the exact problem. It is made for bit because, well, you know what, like 14,000 interaction on that tweet. That's what it's there for, right?
That is what it's there for. To get 14,000 interactions on a tweet, which means they did their job.
Yeah, true. But if we get 14,000 interactions on a Canadian soccer tweet, hey, I'll be happy.
I suppose. But maybe we want to talk about 2026, all right.
Well, the cities involved. Earlier this week, we've seen the list of cities, last week, I believe. And Philly is one of them, of course. What are the chances Philly gets a game? How important a game, and how important is it to have World Cup games in 2026 in Philly?
I think that the odds are very good that Philadelphia will be part of this in the end, because they have a 68,000 seat stadium with a great grass surface that's wide enough for soccer, which not every NFL stadium is. And it is a site equipped with excellent transportation infrastructure, not only within the city in terms of getting from the city center to the stadium. It's about a 10-minute, 15-minute subway ride and then about a 10-minute walk. But it's also, Philadelphia as a city is very easily accessible from a lot of other cities, whether by train from Boston and Washington and New York, or by air from the West Coast or Chicago or Montreal or wherever. So I think Philadelphia is very well situated. Certainly has a better chance than Baltimore, I think, of getting games, and might even have a better chance than Washington of getting games. Unless Washington builds a new NFL stadium between now and then, because the one they have now is terrible, and they've built enough sideline seating all the way down to the edge of the field that it might be too narrow.
Yeah, and that would be a shame. But when you're looking at geographically speaking, for the United States especially, how would you do the World Cup? We're looking at a possibility of around 60 games in the United States. How would you separate them? Would you go geographically? Would you make a, northeastern block where Philly, New York, and maybe Montreal or other cities could be involved, a Florida block, West Coast block, Midwest block? How would you approach it?
Well, it's an interesting question, because the first question that has to be answered doing that is how many venues there are going to be. And the latest, the press release that went out when they listed the cities that had bid, was that the bid that's sent to FIFA will have 20 to 25 venues. And the host committee expects to pick, quote, at least 12 locations, end quote. I'd go a lot higher than that. And I know FIFA might not want it. But if this is really about taking the game to new places and leaving a legacy of this World Cup as sort of the capstone to the growth of soccer in North America, then I would go to at least 15. Because you can regionalize this, especially in the group stage, so that you have teams in the East, in the Northeast, teams in the South, teams in the Southwest, teams in the Northwest, including Vancouver, and the Eastern pod would, include Montreal, potentially Toronto. Toronto could also be in sort of a central pod with Chicago and other places. So I'd go 15-20. And I will tell you, it's interesting that you asked me about Philadelphia, because to me, there is one of all of the cities on this list of 41. Maybe not all of them have great hotel infrastructure, but to me, there is one city more than any other that is under actual pressure to deliver something with this World Cup bid. And Kevin, that is your city, Montreal.
Yeah, a lot of work to be done on the stadium. That's the first thing needed. Take the roof off, winterize the stadium in a way where, weatherize more than winterize, but still a lot of work there. And the thing is, Montreal could be a good training city, like a city where teams can base themselves and go play to Toronto, go play in New York, go play to Philly, and base to Montreal with the accommodation of the Montreal Impact Training Center and using Stade Saputo as a training pitch. That has been approached, but for a game itself, a lot of work needs to be done in the area of the
I
stadium.
cannot imagine similar to, on an even bigger scale than Toronto not being part of the 2015 Women's World Cup. I cannot imagine the biggest soccer event in the world coming to Canada and not making the most diverse and soccer-mad city in the country an essential part of it.
Well, I agree. I can't fathom it either. It has to happen. The feasibility is going to be difficult. They're building a brand new bridge, and billions of dollars are going to that bridge because they have to do it quickly before the other Champlain Bridge falls. So they have to finish that bridge. But it's gigantic, by the way. If you take the Champlain Bridge lately, it's quite impressive. But back to soccer, I can't fathom a World Cup in Canada, United States, and Mexico without a game in Montreal. But Montreal needs to show they're ready for that game, and it's more than just talking about, the stadium. If maybe there's a way to get another 40,000, 45, 50,000 stadium in the future by then. Like maybe Saputo has become bigger. I don't know. This might be utopian dreams, but making Stade Olympique, the Big O, ready for a World Cup game in 2026 with all the necessities of technology, of fiber optics cable bandwidth. If you're talking about the surface, how are you going to get sun on that thing to make sure the grass is stable and not just a temporary grass situation over turf that's not conducive to a high-level game, in my opinion. I'd rather have turf than fake grass on top of turf. The thing is, it's the feasibility and the amount of money involved that, for me, are giving a strike to Montreal, unfortunately. And I would be the first one to be there. Like, I'll cover those games. I'll be at the stadium. I'll talk about it, and I'll be proud and loud as much as I can. But I still see a difficulty getting everything done.
I cannot fathom, as I said, I just cannot fathom a World Cup that is not with games played in Montreal. I just can't. And it goes back to a question that I have been asking on this show ever since Canada first floated the idea of bidding against the United States instead of with it for 2026. And that is, will the taxpayers of Quebec allow for public money to be spent on a renovation to Olympic Stadium?
That's what I'm worried about. Everybody's a little bit afraid of putting more money in that thing. We already spent billions on that thing as taxpayers for the last 30 years. So we're a little cold to the idea of putting more money on that thing.
Well, you spend a lot of money on other things, and there are some outside observers who would say you spend some money on putting a cross in your provincial parliament.
Yeah, well, the mayor's going to mayor. But, yeah.
It is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I'm generally against public financing of stadiums. And I think the question has to be asked of the private investment community too. Are they going to try to renovate the baseball stadium to be the World Cup stadium? If all of the private money goes to trying to get the Expos back?
Yeah, I don't.
And I know that Videotron will not spend a dime on this thing because they won't spend any money on a television property that they don't have the rights to.
Yeah, exactly.
But the questions need to be asked, and unfortunately, I know there are a lot of other things going on in Montreal and in Quebec right now. Unfortunately, the questions need to be asked right now.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it is time to get ready for that bid process and to be able to present a proper plan, a proper program for how you're going to get the stadium up to standard. And that's one thing that leads me to my next question. We've talked about cities, and Duane and I talked about it last week. But Jonathan, where would the final be? Where would you put the final? And let's talk about the opener too. Where would you put the opener, and where would you put the final of the 2026 World Cup?
The final is going to be in New York or Los Angeles. If it's in LA, it'll be at the new NFL stadium that they're building. If it's in New York, it'll be at the MetLife Stadium, and it'll be in New York because they could play it later in the afternoon, for television in the Americas and television in Europe, satisfy both of them.
Okay.
The opening game is an interesting question. I would not be surprised if it's in Mexico City.
The Azteca.
Yes.
Makes a lot of sense.
To celebrate, that venue being such a historic home for soccer, having hosted multiple World Cup finals and so on. But I don't know. It has to be at least 80,000 seats for the opener. We know that. And of the venues that are in the pile at the moment, these are the venues with over 80,000. Dallas, whether they go to the Cotton Bowl or the Cowboys Stadium, I'm sure they'll go to the Cowboys Stadium. I can't see it any other way.
Yeah.
Dallas, LA, the new NFL Stadium.
Indianapolis.
I doubt they'll use the Rose Bowl. They might use the LA Coliseum, but I think they'll use the new NFL Stadium. That'll be 80,000. New York is 80,000. FedEx Field in Washington is 82,000, although they keep reducing it because the football team there can't sell any tickets at all.
You got Indianapolis too.
Mexico City.
Lucas Oil Field. It's pretty big. It's 85 or even 90, I believe.
Where?
Indianapolis, Lucas Oil Field Stadium.
No, 65,700.
That's it.
Yes.
I thought it was a lot bigger. Jeez.
No.
Oh well, there goes that idea. But I have to agree with you though. The opener, Estadio Azteca, seems to be the front runner for me for historical reason, for 1970, 1986 passing the torch to 2026 and the joint program, and I think it could probably be a nice idea to see Azteca filled with 100,000 people for the opener of the 2026 World Cup.
And it would be.
Let's take a quick break, Jonathan. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the Philadelphia Union. I know it's been a long season, and we'll try to explain why.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
Not officially eliminated, but barely hanging on. The Philadelphia Union and their playoff hopes are hanging.
Oh, they're done.
They're done, eh?
Yes.
Is there a word that describes their season? They were a little bit better in the beginning of the season. They had a decent regular season, but not like last year. Last year was a surprise run to start and to continue. Eventually it dwindled down, and dwindled down in the playoff too. But last year they had a positive beginning of the season. This year was a bit more difficult. How would you describe the season?
Inferior. In one word. You wanted one word, right?
Oh, sure, yeah. But
inferior.
one word works, inferior.
They aren't good enough. They don't have the talent. They don't have the talent to compete in MLS and win a trophy. I was on Michael McCall's show out in Vancouver over the weekend. And I said, look, they don't have the talent. And if you fire Jim Curtin, you are asserting as the front office that you believe this team can win a trophy with the roster that it has. It cannot. And if you fire Jim Curtin and give the next guy $3 million to play with, I'm going to ask why you didn't give Jim Curtin the $3 million to play with, because the players generally like him except for one or two. And a lot of people think highly of him as a young coach. Let him prove that if you give him the money and he gets better players and he still can't win, then you fire him.
It brings me to this question, and it's an idea that's been brewing in my head for a little while. But with the rise of the Toronto FCs and New York City FCs and Chicago Fire, big team, big names, big results, big performances throughout
big spending of money,
spending the money, big paychecks. What is the future for teams like Philadelphia Union, the Revolution, San Jose Earthquakes, teams that have been battling for playoff spots usually in the last few years, but now with the rise of big clubs, those playoff spots are becoming few and far between. What's the future and the happiness factor for the fans? Because they know they're not going to win the league.
San Jose, to its credit, has gone out and spent.
Yeah, more than expected. Yeah, it's true.
And they fired their coach and they fired their GM. And they went out and improved there. The Union, they're spending a lot of money on their academy. I get that. But you still have to spend on strikers and playmakers in this league because they still are the difference makers. And Jim Curtin has said repeatedly that, he believes that this team is going to go out in the offseason and go get some difference-making players. And they are going to have a lot of money coming off the payroll this winter. Maurice Adu is probably going to be gone. Roland Albert, Ilsinho, Chris Pontius are probably all going to be gone. So they're going to have some money to spend. But they need to spend more than that. And they need to spend more than that plus whatever target allocation money is going to come in. Because all of the other teams in the league are spending more than that. And if they are not able to, then there's going to be some pressure from the fan base and from others for the majority owner of the team, Jay Sugarman, to get out. If they cannot be competitive.
Well, we have started to see already in the stands the attendance of the Philadelphia Union is not necessarily
plummeting.
It's plummeting very rapidly. And we've seen with Chicago that it's possible to get those fans back, but it takes investment, takes results.
They would be back in a heartbeat if the Union signed some players and started winning games.
Does it take a name? Does it take a name, or does it take like a Valeri
All
that
it
doesn't
takes
have a
is
name?
winning.
But
It doesn't matter who the players are. Sorry for cutting you off.
No problem.
All it takes is winning. And that is the case in every market in Major League Soccer. All you have to do is win games.
How far are they for winning?
Right now, they're pretty far. Right now, they're behind 9 other teams out of the 11 in the East. That's pretty far.
What would you do in the offseason? It's getting to a point now where next year they need to at least mount a battle for a playoff spot, and not necessarily just for Jim Curtin's sake, but for the entire team, for players.
I would buy a playmaker, I would buy a striker, and I would buy at least one winger. And by the way, they scout almost exclusively in Europe. They don't scout in South America very much, and South America has always been where you go to get a playmaker, between $700,000 and $1 million.
Yeah.
Who's sort of the second level caliber player in Argentina or someplace like that. That's where you get the Diego Valeris and the Ignacio Piattis that win you games.
No, exactly. And that will be very important for the Union. But one thing, if you go back to the last offseason, to finish off the segment, Jonathan, with the Oniyeus and Bedoyas and the new crop of players, there were some injuries, unfortunately. But was there a sense of positivity when those names came in, or did you know that would not be good enough?
Well, I said during the last offseason they needed to sign a veteran center back, and they did that in Oguchi Onyewu, and he's been terrific. And I said they needed to sign a striker, and they went out and signed Jay Simpson for, $500,000 or something like that. He was a targeted allocation money player. And they signed a left back in Giuliano Wijnaldum for cheap, and he's young, and he's turned out to be pretty good. That's worked. Onyewu has worked. Simpson has been a bust, a complete and total bust. And I put some pressure on the team at the time they signed him. And they said, this guy going to be the guy who's going to be your leading goal scorer? And Ernie Stewart, in fact, I'll pull it up right now. I'll read to you. Sorry for the typing noise in the background, but I'm going to look it up as I'm talking to you. What Ernie Stewart told me in January at the Combine, right after they had signed Jay Simpson. Ernie Stewart said to me, Jay came through the network that we have in Europe and the contacts that we have over there. It came to our attention, and after our first evaluations, we made sure to go after him. I then asked Simpson, okay, this guy's played for Leyton Orient, and he was most recently in England's League Two, which is their third division. I said, is this guy going to be the top of the depth chart striker that they've been waiting to see, or is he going to be a compliment to C.J. Sapong and Charlie Davies? And Stewart said, quote, the thing we were looking for in this offseason was somebody whose alarm bells go off when we get into the 18-yard box. That's what we were looking for, focusing on and targeting, and Jay has that. Once the ball falls into the 18-yard box, he has those instincts as a center forward to be in and around the ball. That's a very important quality that a center forward needs. That was something we wanted to address, and with Jay, we feel we've done that. So I said, okay, how do you judge this guy's talent level when he's been playing in England's League Two? And Stewart said, I don't look so much at leagues and where they play and all that because it doesn't say that much. I look at certain qualities that people have and we're trying to find, and then obviously with his experience in the Premier League, but also in the Championship and being with Arsenal in the Academy, because he was an Arsenal Academy product, it brings a certain thing to the surface. It does not necessarily always say where you play at that moment, what kind of center forward you can be for the Philadelphia Union. That's a lot of compliments. And what has Jay Simpson done with those compliments this year?
Yeah. Nothing.
1 goal in 18 games.
Lost a spot to C.J. Sapong and never got it back.
All right, 4 starts, 429 minutes, got outcompeted by C.J. Sapong in practice on a regular basis. As I've said to folks, if he was anywhere close to good enough, he'd be playing. He's not playing, therefore, you might rightly conclude that he isn't good enough.
And he's not good enough in a way that if you make him play, you kind of lose the confidence of other players that are trying to break the lineup and performing well in training but not getting playing time because you're supposed to play the players that perform well in training, correct? So if you actually pull the trick on the other side, it would alienate some part of the locker room. So that's one of the reasons why C.J. Sapong has been on that spot. The team is, like you mentioned, the way he trains, the way he plays himself into that team.
And look, C.J. Sapong is a good player in MLS. Is he a great player? No. Should he be the top of the striker depth chart? No. But he busts his tail on the field, that's for sure, and he gets fouled more than almost any other striker I've seen in the league, except for Josie Altidore, whose name I realize I can't mention on your show because it's an epithet in Montreal.
Sure.
But last I checked, by the way, y'all still gave up 2 goals that you shouldn't have, folks, in that game.
Yeah, I know.
So you can complain about Josie Altidore flopping all you want, but stop giving up goals that you shouldn't be giving up.
Toronto was a better team. I can attest to that, and I can look at things objectively sometimes, and, well, they're a juggernaut, and Toronto.
Would the refereeing in MLS be good if Altidore had been called for diving?
Sure, but it's...
Would it be objectively good for the rest of time? And all the other problems would be erased because Altidore had been started for diving in Montreal.
One time doesn't change anything at this point.
So. Well.
Exactly. Jonathan, we thank you very much for your time. You can follow Jonathan at The Goalkeeper. And Jonathan, anything you want to promote before we say goodbye?
I just sit on Twitter and yell at people. That's what I do anymore.
Well, you can follow him on Twitter at The Goalkeeper. We'll be right back with some Champions League preview.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And the Champions League group stage is back today with 8 games happening all at 2:45 p.m. this afternoon. Starts with Chelsea versus Karabakh FK. Roma Atletico. That's a pretty nice matchup right there. Olympiacos Sporting, that is a nice matchup as well. One of the best teams, if not the best team, in the Greek league against Sporting. Man United FC Basel, interesting matchup right there. Man United, their return to the group stage of the Champions League for the first time in a few years. Benfica Moscow, Red Army. Benfica versus Red Army. That's another interesting matchup. Barcelona Juventus, probably the match of the day as well. This afternoon, Bayern Munich, Anderlecht of the Belgian League, and Celtic of the Scottish Premier League, of course, versus PSG. No, this game is not available in North America, but Celtic and PSG, you can probably find a way to watch it if you know where to look for. This could be interesting. Neymar with PSG in the Champions League versus Celtic. That is a game that I will try to keep an eye on and talk about it tomorrow with the return of Duane. But my game of the day, yes, Chelsea. I will be looking at the Chelsea game, but I will try to keep an eye on Barcelona and as well as the other slates of games. That's why today my word of the day is DVR. Make sure you program your DVR correctly. Usually you can record up to 3 or 4 at the same time, maybe one in standard definition. It doesn't matter. Today's the type of day where you need to do so. And if you need to pull up a tablet and pull up your laptop and find ways to record streaming videos on your laptop, to record another game so you make sure you can watch it, yes, you can do that. And now is the time to do so. 8 games you have to watch today. Roma Atleti, like that's salivating type of soccer matchup right there. The post-Totti era in Roma in the Champions League. Madrid, Man United back there with Lukaku playing great, with Mata on fire lately. United top of the Premier League as we speak, versus a Basel that's been surprisingly but never necessarily breaking that glass ceiling in the Champions League. Always a mid-group type of team that maybe might finish third and go play in the Europa League. We've seen this happen. Barcelona, the post-Neymar era in Barcelona versus Juventus. Can Buffon, the ageless Buffon, well, he's not ageless, he has an age. It just doesn't matter. He gets better. It's not even wine anymore. Like, wine doesn't even cut it anymore. He's like Scotch. He gets finer and finer with the decades. Good on you, Buffon. And I will keep an eye out for you today as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Kev Laramee and follow the show at Soccer Today SPN. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., we'll be back with a brand new edition. And as always, until then, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.